is it doesn't require people to go inside and stand around. And
hi, everyone.
There's plenty of evidence at this point that
gonna get going. I'm just gonna tell everybody.
Hi, Kenzie.
Hi, how are you, Ed?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm good. Remind me, I need to touch base with you on a food thing in District 2.
Okay.
So,
okay.
After this, just don't let me forget.
Okay, I won't.
All right. I think I'm gonna get going with an opening statement so that we can get moving. All right. Calling this working session of the Boston City Council's Ways and Means Committee to order. For the record, my name is Kenzie Bach. I'm the District 8 City Councilor and also the chair of the Ways and Means Committee. This working session is being recorded and live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv. It will be rebroadcast on Comcast Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and Verizon Channel 1964. The council's budget review process this year incorporates both hearings and working sessions. The working sessions are designed to be a chance for councilors to generate questions for an upcoming set of hearings. So as such, we don't take public testimony at these, but we do welcome you to participate either by testifying at a hearing. You can find the Zoom link on the public notices, or by submitting your testimony through boston.gov/council-FY21 budget, or emailing ccc.wm@boston.gov. On the council website, we also accept videos and happy to play those after hearings, or you can come to one of our public testimony hearings on May 26th at 6 p.m. focused on BPS, or May 28th at 6 p.m. on any aspect of the city budget. Today's working session is on docket 0588 to 0590, orders for the FY21 operating budget, including annual appropriations for departmental operations, for the school department and for other post-employment benefits. Docket 0591 to 0592, orders for capital fund transfer appropriations. Docket 0593 to 0596, orders for the capital budget, including loan orders and lease purchase agreements. Those are collectively the set of dockets related to the mayor's budget proposal. And then we are also just going to be discussing today docket 0599, which is an order authorizing an appropriation from the 21st Century Fund, also known as the Public Educational or Governmental Access and Cable Related Fund, pursuant to Section 53F3 quarters of Chapter 44 of the General Law. So that's a very specific fund managed by DoIT. Our focus area today will be DoIT, so the Department of Information and Technology, ISD, the Inspectional Services Department, the BPDA, the Boston Planning and Development Agency, and then, as I mentioned before, that fund. So again, for colleagues, we're going to just run through and do people's questions on different topics. I'm happy with these. I think, interestingly, we wouldn't normally group DoIT and ISD together. We are this year because of the unique budget cycle, but there's actually a fair bit of collaboration and needed collaboration this year. So it makes sense to sort of talk about them at the same time. And obviously ISD and BPDA are also connected in various ways. So I think what we'll do is just run through. I'm not going to separate the question groups, so people can throw out their questions for any of those three departments. And just if you have a ton of questions, maybe do a first tranche and then save some for the second tranche. So to that end, I think we'll get going. I'm gonna first recognize my colleague, Councillor Liz Breeden. She'll be followed by Councillor Ed Flynn, then Councillor Lydia Edwards, then Councillor Michael Flaherty, and then Councillor Julia Mejia. Liz, questions?
Thank you. I'm curious, early on we had the conversation a few months ago with regard to the city clerk's office and the information technology support needed to monitor the lobbyists and register lobbyists, etc. And one of the issues that seemed to come up in that conversation was the access to reliable and appropriate information technology. And I'd like to know, is there any proposal in the works to put some resources into updating that system and making it easier and less labor intensive for the clerk's office? That's one question. The Inspectional Services Department, ISD, brings in a lot of revenue from permitting. I'd like to know how much they bring in and then how that is redistributed into the general funds. And then what they anticipate will happen now post-COVID. Will there be a decline in that revenue, or are they anticipating a drop in numbers of new permits for construction? And with regard to BPDA, I will hold off my questions to the next round. Those are the two on the top of my head right now. Thank you.
Great. All right. Thanks so much. Councillor Flynn?
Good morning, Councillor Block. Can you hear me?
Yep, hear you great. I can't see you, but I can hear you great.
Okay. Yeah, Councillor Block, for BPDA, I'd like to start with, in my district, I have several large development projects. And I want to know about the public meetings and the process as the city thinks about restarting development projects. Is the BPDA planning on changing the public input process and how residents weigh in on a particular project? Are we thinking about using Zoom meetings? And are we also considering large public gatherings where all residents have the opportunity to talk about a project? So just a lot of those types of questions. And what about residents that may not have the technology to go on to Zoom? Many of our seniors may not have the access. How would their voice be heard in this process? And if we don't have public meetings, what is our interaction going to be with residents that may not speak English as well? What is our capabilities to work on language access issues? For DoIT, now that many of us are doing virtual meetings and are becoming more reliant on communication technology for our work, is DoIT able to respond fully to this increased need? Do they have the right technology to respond? Do they have the personnel technology capabilities to handle the increased need for virtual meetings or other forms of communication technology as we might continue to work remotely? And again, as I mentioned with BPDA, what is the outreach we're doing to many people that may not have access to computer or technology or the internet? And again, language access. ISD, while the pause in construction is going to be lifted, obviously. What are the restrictions in place to promote physical distancing? Is there going to be one standard, or are we going to have many different types of standards depending on the development? And if there is a violation, what will ISD do in terms of possibly shutting down? Will there be fines associated with it? I'd like to know what the current construction plans are. And do we have enough personnel at ISD to do all these inspections if they are needed? So I want to know about their personnel, making sure that they have the right number of employees. And then are we doing Council Block? Are we doing PEG Access Fund?
Yep, that too.
Okay. So I think public access television has a place in our society. It's a way for people to access information, share their voice. Networks like BNN, an important outlet for residents. And I know there are some federal measures that could potentially reduce the funding for these cable access stations. What are we going to do if that happens? And what are the ways to fund PEG stations, PEG stations? And can we work with DoIT in making sure that all of our residents really have the computer technology access, internet, so that they can also be part of this process as well? So those are my questions for now, Councilor Block. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Councilor Flynn. Councilor Edwards.
Thank you. Couple questions, starting off with the ISD. I want to know how the ZBA reforms are outlined, how they are currently outlined, and how their implementation is taking place. They had a 45-day deadline for a lot of their technological upgrades, and particularly I'm curious about the creation of the ombudsperson position. It was supposed to be expanded and to have someone there, language access, of course, additional staff to ensure ethical compliance, which again are now part of the requirements, background checks, things like that. Tech upgrades for the modernization, including email notice to abutters, newsletters. They were also supposed to make sure that all plans would be submitted electronically and they didn't have to go to 1010 Mass Ave, and that they would be permanently available for anybody to look at. So those things, I'm curious where we are in that and how much they have spent so far. So not just, I don't want to just respond to, well, we're working on it. I want to know how much money has actually been committed to even do those upgrades before COVID, and how much has been spent so far, which I really doubtful much. So I'm happy to, and also if they need additional funds, how much? So if they intend to move forward with virtual hearings in June, the ZBA, how are they equipping civic associations with tools they need to be accessible? So a lot of, this is a capacity issue. Is the city going to create kind of a portal for civic associations? Are they going to create a free Zoom channel? What are they going to do to allow for a little bit more equity with civic associations to move online? Especially older neighbors, those who don't speak English. What kind of lines are they going to set up for the civic associations to be as accessible as possible? Specifically in the district, we'd love for a new, not just a new, an additional. Peter Kenny does a great job. Let me just say that. But we want to see if there's with all the development going, if one person, one building inspector for all of East Boston really makes sense anymore, if we can get a part-time. Also the same for even the North End, if the two could be split, just looking for more building inspectors and capacity. I have 3 small projects on my block, which will start next week. And I don't think any of them are socially distancing. I don't know that they can. So how are we going to get building inspectors at the capacity that they need to go and inspect on construction? There were 4 new additional housing inspectors needed if they will be doing housing short-term. Oh yeah, the short-term rental inspections too are also going to be needed. So I'm curious if they could explain how much money was added to their budget for short-term rentals and for now COVID inspections. And I want a dollar amount. And then how much is being spent so far. Are they So I also am curious, are they cross-referencing the short-term rental database right now to ensure no fraud and multiple family owners? And what monies they've spent so far on enforcing the order and dealing with complaints. With BPDA, I am curious how much the cost of defending against the HUD lawsuit cost the city of Boston. We did get outside counsel, and it was defending based off of the BPDA's inaction, I suppose, or failure to comply with federal law. So just curious how much they cost us. Also, how much money they have spent, not the developer, but how much has BPDA spent for language access, period, but specifically in Suffolk Downs. I believe, and I'm concerned that they actually just put it on the developer to pay for all of that. And I don't think that that's a policy that we should continue to have, considering that person is now hired by the developer to interpret and push and move versus the city, who is going to be neutral. What if any payments have they made and consulting in the AFFH? Have they made any movement, any attempt to move to try and be compliant with the AFFH requirements? And if so, how much have they spent? And could they show anywhere in their budget that they are complying with the AFFH standards that they are federally mandated to comply with? With Plan East Boston, what's being done with community engagement budgets now that everything is online? How much are they utilizing for planning consultants? I would say the same two questions for also Plan Charlestown. I believe the Navy Yard next to Rayfin Industrial Park is the #2 moneymaker for BPDA. Curious how much they made this year, or fiscal year 2019 into 2020 in total off of Charlestown sales. And if they could break down again where that money went, specifically in the neighborhood, if at all, or if it just all went back to pay themselves. And that's all I have for now.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Councilor Edwards. All right, next up is Councilor Flaherty, and then it'll be Council President Janey.
How we could start to keep folks on track with respect to permits, et cetera, but not having to require them to come all the way into City Hall. So my expectation is DoIT may be taxed a little further than they probably had expected when they submitted their budget. So just want to put an FYI out there that as we're responding to this and we're asking folks to be cognizant of social distancing and not coming in if they don't have to, and being able to get things and access things online, DoIT's going to be a big piece of this. It's how it dovetails to ISD. I thought it was masterful that you had both of these together. If you think about ISD's role in terms of what they've been doing lately and how they dovetail with DoIT, from short-term rentals to rental inspections to restaurant grading to sandwich boards to the plastic ban, all of those things, weights and measures, rodent control, that all requires us to be technologically up to speed, particularly for those that are out there performing, our public servants that are out there performing these tasks, make sure that they have the technology to be able to perform their function in an expeditious way. So I think it's great that these two are together. So want to making sure that ISD has what they need, make sure that their technology again is up to date, particularly around the around building plans and how people can access and review building plans. So from ISD, I'd like an update on the short-term rental enforcement to date, and as well as the rental inspections to date. I just don't know how we're able to keep pace with both of those. Are we keeping pace? So, and then shifting to the BRA doing business as the BPDA. Again, getting more clarity with respect to city, particularly BRA-owned properties, and have we reached out to all of our tenants have we reached out to all of our subtenants? We heard testimony that the BPDA does not even know who some of the subtenants are. Somewhat incredulous, so I'd like to dial in a little bit deeper than that, and making sure that if folks need assistance, and whether that's on the rental side of the house, as we again start to talk about reopening and getting businesses back on their feet, what, if anything, can we do to reach out to them? And it should not just be left up to the landlord, because we don't know whether or not the landlord is passing that down through the subs. I think we need to have a conversation with the tenant, and I think we also need to have conversation with the subtenants, making sure that whatever programs the BRA has, make sure that they're getting out there, particularly to our smaller businesses. So that's kind of it in a nutshell for now with respect to questions in those three departments. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Councillor Flaherty. Next will be Councillor Janey, and then Councillor Asabi George, then Councillor O'Malley. Councillor Janey.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Hear you great.
Wonderful. I don't know if you had a particular order or not.
No, I asked folks because there's all these interconnections, right?
Wonderful.
And
Wonderful.
so, yeah.
So perfect. I'll just dive in then. I appreciate the opportunity. Bill, and I joined a little late. I hope none of this is repetitive, but just building on some of what Councilor Flaherty was saying around inspections. I have questions just in terms of trash collection and how that is going. So one thing that I noticed, particularly in areas that are more densely populated, some of the apartment buildings that rely on dumpsters, whether or not those dumpsters have free access to the streets the way they did pre-COVID, because now cars are always there. And so I'm seeing some challenge, and I just wonder if things are getting backed up, and if so, how we're handling those situations. I believe a 10% increase in this line item for ISD, and I was just wondering about any information that could be provided there. I wonder around capacity with enforcement. Many of the, as we open up, and certainly in FY21, hopefully we will see some of the more restrictions loosened, and ISD, I'm sure, is one of our departments, as we have to be responsible for many of the things that the governor talked about in his press conference in terms of enforcement. So just wondering about capacity overall, and how monitoring the public health guidelines, how that will go. With BPDA, obviously there are lots of district projects that I would be interested in, just having the breakdown there in terms of dollar amounts, where things are in the planning stage, particularly the planned Dudley projects that were happening in Nubian Square, or that had been designated in Nubian Square, and what the delay in terms of construction and non-essential businesses being closed, what that has done in terms of any cost overruns, or obviously the time is being extended. So just like a clear understanding of that. I want to keep reminding us, I'm not sure, I assume Councilor Edwards, who was right before Councilor Flaherty, may have brought this up on the BPDA stuff with the working session, I believe that we had, that she chaired, and how they do their planning. But I want to affirm the need for equitable planning whenever we talk about BPDA. I certainly would want to understand with any of the projects that they've done, or any money that they spend, just the breakdown in terms of diversity there. With DoIT, again, I wonder about capacity, given I think more and more of our work clearly is dependent upon technology, and not just during this kind of stay at home, but I think what it has really illustrated is a need that many of us want to continue to utilize technology to engage our constituents. And so would just kind of want to understand around capacity, where we are with that as we contract services out, understanding where that money is going and how much of it is going to, again, same questions that I have on every hearing, how much of it's going to women, locally owned businesses, or businesses owned by people of color. I have specific questions just about our own infrastructure and where we are around the SIRE update in terms of, I want to understand like the RFP and where we are with that, whether or not that, and on just remote, I don't want to leave remote working just yet. So many of us have been using Zoom. My understanding from the administration is they'd like for us all to be on, the same platform, and there's some desire to look at WebEx, Cisco. And so we just kind of want to understand more from that perspective, the benefits of that and whether or not there are any trade-offs there. And then, on the digital divide, as more of us, those of us who can work remotely are able to, but many aren't, and how we get just more access, the cities, how we can get more free Wi-Fi out, I think, to more city residents. I'd be interested in whatever plans we have in the works for extending or expanding those opportunities so that we can close the digital divide. And then I believe I want to understand more about the Digital Equity Fund and whether and where that is, whether an organization has received it already, if so, who, if not, if it's still out to bid, just where we are in that process. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. Thank you, Madam President. All right, next up is Councillor Asabi George, and then it'll be Councillor O'Malley. Councillor Asabi George.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I tuned in a few minutes late, so I do ask for forgiveness ahead of time if I repeat any questions, but are we doing all categories? DoIT?
Yeah, we're just doing all categories. So BPDA, DoIT, and ISD.
Perfect. So my DoIT question is around 311 service expansion, and just wondering about our ability on 311, both the call and the app, if we could include voter registration, an online SNAP application, locations of sharp collection kiosks, as well as the location of open recovery beds and detox beds. Also for substance use disorder resources and supports, as well as resources to handle domestic violence or someone who's looking for mental health supports. I think that using the app and the call service to do a little bit more service oriented would be really helpful to me. Also, in regards to 311, I'm wondering if there is any resources available to help our 311 operators respond to some of the mental health calls that they may be getting, especially during this time. But going forward, we continue to recognize mental health as a real crisis in our city, and more training our 311 call takers can have, the better, even if it's a simple first aid mental health first aid class, something that a number of us participated in earlier this spring. There's also been a sort of persistent request for the stenographic record of our public meetings for those that are dealing with some hearing issues. On the BPDA, I think our colleagues have asked a number of really thoughtful questions. I have one, I don't think it was asked, regarding some of the work to support our artists in their live workspace. We've done some work around creating more live workspace, and live space that's affordable for our artists, but also responsive to the different mediums that our artists practice, because it is more than just sort of, the painting. There's performance art, there's sort of other mediums, if it's clay work or glass work, where there are different needs within a unit of housing or workspace, and the BPDA plays a particular role in creating more of that affordable space. I do have some ISD questions, and this has come up, I think, quite a bit in the recent weeks because of the COVID pandemic and the lack of public hearings, or not the lack of public hearings, but moving away from public hearings in person at this point. But just to a continued desire to have greater community engagement, especially around sharing information about upcoming hearings and allowing our residents to engage in those hearings in different ways. And through this pandemic, I think that the city and ISD and the ZBA have been a little bit more thoughtful about how do we outreach to residents, but just increasing the capacity to do more of this direct outreach to abutters in particular, I think is really important for us. There's some talk at ISD around the neighborhood walks, and just curious about what that vision, what is envisioned through those neighborhood walks, how often they will happen, and are they done with community, with neighbors, and with civic and neighborhood leaders, and how outreach will be done around that. Curious as to an update on the additional dwelling units, ADUs, and I do wonder about sort of this desire to keep people a little bit more physically distant if the ADUs are impacted by that at all. And then certainly an update on short-term rentals, which I'm sure a number of my colleagues may have asked before I got into this meeting. And then in specific regards to COVID-19, this pandemic, and with the slow but certain reopening of our city, how we'll need to respond around health inspections and other inspectors that would be through ISD. So I think that's it for me. I'm going to do a closer review of my notes and talk to my team who's followed this meeting along to see if there's anything else. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great, perfect. Thanks so much, Councillor Sabi-George. Councillor O'Malley, and then it'll be Councillor Mejia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, colleagues. So yeah, I'll just tick through a lot of my relevant interest has been already articulated by many of you. Beginning with DoIT, looks like the department was essentially level funded, with the exception of line 52900, which is contracted services, has seen a $2.2 million decrease. Obviously, as we recognize, readjustments that will likely happen to the budget as reflected in to the reopening of the city and the supports we're going to need, I would argue that DoIT is going to need some significant increase to both build and maintain platforms to allow for constituent service to be done remotely. I'm talking about, ordering. I believe now you can get birth certificates online, but just other ways to utilize some platforms. So DoIT has a key role to play. So I want to make sure that the funding there is able to handle what will likely be a renewed focus on services, on e-services and e-constituent services specifically. So that's sort of my line of questioning. It's essentially level funded. There has been a $2.2 million decrease in contracted services. I don't know if that was building into some platform perhaps, but it looks like we may want to rethink that as we sort of reconvene in the weeks ahead. Secondly, ISD, there's been about a $2 million increase. Line 51200 is $1.5 million in overtime, so that's the bulk of that increase. It's a high before ISD, but I think it recognizes the importance of inspectors. So one thing I've literally been asking at every ISD budget hearing since I've been on this budget is increase the number of inspectors. Oftentimes we can't get a lot of these important time-sensitive constituent services issues addressed. Not for a lack of trying through ISD, it's just they're men and women who serve as inspectors for the city are often stretched way too thin. So I think that's reflected by the overtime. So that's just one thing we want to see if there's any opportunity to increase and grow that number. It's also important to note how the building market is going to sort of reflect the need for more inspectors, what that looks like going forward, and that it's a segue into the BPDA. We don't have a lot of information because they don't share a lot of information with us in preparation of this. They do suggest that the capital budget expenditure is going to increase by $1 million this year over last year, which is a significant increase. I'm just wondering if that's reflective of the new economic real estate market that we're likely to encounter. So a lot of questions similar to DND, but more so with BPDA because it's a lot of private development, what it means for the market, what it means for the position of particularly some properties that we'd be looking at that we've been discussing in the past, how that changes. I also want to see a deep dive in some of the strategy they've been doing. I don't know if John Delzell will be part of the participating panelists. He does some tremendous work, but I have a lot of questions around the carbon neutral building assessment, which has been included in Article 37. The BPDA has plans to lead a public process to develop new zoning requirements and a timeline of implementation to get to net zero carbon buildings, something that this body is very, very passionate about. Obviously, I celebrate that work. A little more to say about that at our council meeting on Wednesday, but I want to see just do a check-in on what that Article 37 renovation has been. I think it was last year's budget hearing, or perhaps shortly after, where the BPDA announced that they were going to start a public process. Again, one that I wholeheartedly celebrate. Want to check in on that, and I'd say those are the general top line questions I'm looking forward to, Madam Chair. Thank you. Great.
Thank you, Councillor O'Malley. Next up, Councillor Mejia.
Hi, yes. Good morning, good afternoon, Chairmanwoman Bach. I got my questions. I'm gonna just do them all, okay?
Great.
So this is for DoIT. What is the role of DoIT when it comes to setting up language access pages and information on the city's website? How is the design of Boston.gov's website with the voices and realities of people who don't speak English? Just curious about kind of what that infrastructure looks like. One of the goals of DoIT is to conduct a cybersecurity study to see where there are gaps in our system. How will that information be shared with the council? I know from my experience with the rental relief application that Google Forms can be manipulated, even when there is clearly false information. How is DoIT playing a role in making sure our online applications are more secure? This is for inspectional services, ISD. I just want to give a quick shout out to ISD. They go real hard for us, and we really do support a lot of their work, making sure that they get the support and dollars they need to function. But I do have a few questions. One of the goals of ISD was to make improvements to the ZBA. I would like for them to expand on how some of those goals, particularly around language access. I'm just really curious about that piece. We heard from our hearing last Friday that the ZBA meetings are rarely, if ever, offered with interpretation. So I'd like to know in general how we're making these meetings more accessible to folks. And I just want to add, it's one thing, it's not just about translation. I'm also curious what, if any, opportunities exist for some of these meetings to also provide childcare, if in regards to trying to remove barriers for people to be able to engage. Another goal is to provide enhanced ethics training. Can they explain what these trainings will involve, and if there will be a cultural competency lens on those trainings? Cultural competency, you know, I keep talking about. One thing is to translate, but to do so in ways that people understand it. I think the same applies for ethics. In general, I'm hoping that ISD can stand on their goals more than with the information they provide. I noticed that they went into detail about their accomplishments over the past year. And while I'm excited to see all that they have done, I'm hoping that they will come back prepared with the same level of detail when it comes to the work that needs to be done. For the Boston Planning and Development Agency, the BPDA, has a goal to establish and maintain a culture of professionalism. And I'm curious to know what has led them to come to this conclusion, and how will they plan to go about creating this culture? I'm just really curious about what that means, how that culture is going to be created, who's going to help them define what that culture should look like, what role would the community be playing to help them crystallize that mission and vision. I'm curious about all of those things. And then how is the BPDA going about identifying new methods of civic engagement in the planning process? How are they activating underrepresented communities who in the past have been targets of redevelopment and so-called urban renewal? I'm really curious when it comes to the BPDA is a community-centered approach to planning and development, whereas the community is not an afterthought, but that we're really building in the infrastructure where our people are able to say, here's an empty lot, here's what we'd like to do with it. And then identifying some builders and some developers who can help bring that vision to life, as opposed to bringing in the developers and the vision and then having us react to it. I would love to figure out what, if any, opportunities exist to kind of redesign the whole design process. definitely committed to that. And also, I'm curious as to whether or not the BPDA would be willing to ensure that childcare and food and interpretation is offered in all of these meetings. I've participated in several of them, and sometimes I'm hungry. So I know what it's like to sit through a meeting at 6 o'clock when you've been working all day and then you expect people to show up and not feed them. So I just think that in the interest of really being about all means all, that I'm curious as to whether or not they're putting some money aside to ensure that those who have not been engaged can be engaged. And you should take a nap while you're at it. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Forgive me. Great, excellent. Okay, I'm going to do my questions, and then I would just ask colleagues who have further questions to raise your blue hands, just so that I know, because I know some people got all their questions out and others have more. So mine, just, DoIT's been connecting up the schools to the city's fiber network, and I think by the end of next year, we're projecting all schools to be connected. So I just want to find out kind of how many schools are remaining. Is there a way to accelerate that timeline? And get a little bit more of an update on, it was alluded to, adding fiber in a bunch of other public buildings. I'm interested in the question of, do we have that in our homeless shelters? Like, how do we, I think one thing that's really happened in COVID is that the access to charging and internet and such has become really hard for unhoused folks and folks who don't have it in their home because cafes are out and public libraries are out. And so trying to think about how could we have a civic infrastructure that provides more of that is important. I also would just echo Councillor Mejia on, increased language access digitally. DoIT's got to be a big piece of that. And so just wondering, and I know there are some technologies in terms of the website that make it easier to translate a page versus others. So curious about that aspect of things. I saw that for the actuals on this year, DoIT seems like they had already by March basically expended their equipment budget. And I don't know whether that was due to a surge related to COVID or just something else, but curious about that and what the big equipment expenditures this year were. Same big picture questions that several people asked about, what DoIT needs in order to support just like a whole new set of functionalities given COVID-19 and the year ahead. I'd also love to just get a little bit more background on how they're thinking about cybersecurity. It seems to me like the more we're shifting things online, the more we really have to make sure we've got good systems on that front. And I feel like governments in general are pretty far behind on that. And would just love to understand what we're doing. There's an IT trainings goal of 600 for the year. Couldn't tell if that was set before COVID or post. And obviously, again, seems like you need a lot more employee IT training support potentially as we transition these processes online. Totally agree with Councillor Edwards that providing some kind of portal, training, resources, et cetera, for our civic associations and neighborhood groups for people who may not have somebody in the group who's a pro at running a electronic meeting, I think would be a really good pro-civic thing we could do, and maybe in partnership with ONS. I'd love to know if there's an opportunity to grow Tech Goes Home, and also just in general understand its relationship, because I know it's a program where the trainings are supported at the public library, but I saw it as a contract line item for DoIT. So I just would love to understand that program, and given the fact that there are so many adults who don't really have great tech access at home and now need it more than ever, would just be interested in what the opportunity to scale there is. And then data security, understanding what our agreement with Google is. I know it came up vis-a-vis whether undocumented folks can feel secure if they put information in a Google form administered by the city. Is Google then, can you then, subpoena Google for that? Seems like you can. Would love to just understand a little bit about how DoIT thinks through how it thinks through and how it contractually manages the rights of like Google to our city data. On BPDA, there were a couple of questions from environment that got referred over to BPDA. So I really want to know what the timeline is for integrating the coastal flood resiliency zoning overlay district into zoning to really make it something that we're planning on the basis of and not just a suggestion. Also interested in the timeline for pursuing carbon neutral zoning, to Councillor O'Malley's point, and building standards that discourage or ban new fossil fuel infrastructure. I would love to follow on the conversation, excuse me, that I was having at the landmarks hearing about how we put historic preservation and planning with history in mind more into our planning processes. And so we'd love to understand the resources of BPDA on that front, and maybe how to move that further up the process earlier on. BPDA addressed a little bit questions around language access in its response to us, but I think it's just so critical that we have a really robust language access program at BPDA, and I don't think we're there yet. So would love to talk about that. I think I'm interested in how the real estate department is shifting how they structure their ground leases in general. And then I think it behooves the council to kind of understand how the BPDA sees its financial future this year, given the situation, since unlike our other departments, it's sort of directly, it relies on its own sources, which are all, lease or transaction rent type sources. So it seems, particularly vulnerable to this economic climate. On ISD, as Councilor O'Malley referenced, there's this 400% increase in overtime last year. Seems like it was related to this after hours inspection regime, which it seems like is something that we want. So how do we do that without an enormous increase in overtime? It sounded from their response like they were planning on something, but I think the council should understand what that is. Definitely want to check in on the short-term rental ordinance and the sort of implementation of that. And then the whole thing, the whole executive order and implementation of these reforms at the Board of Appeals that Councilor Edwards referenced, the ombudsman, the technical support, how we're making, it just seems more important than ever now. In some ways, COVID is making necessary what had been decided, which was to try to make the ZBA more accessible in terms of documentation from people's homes electronically. But where are we on that? My understanding is that there is some substantial money in this budget for implementation on that front, but I just like to get it and maybe to hear both from ISD and from DoIT about that process and the plans going forward. I also think that I know that ISD has been an area where language access issues have been persistent. There's some forms translated, but when it comes to kind of people being able to really interface with the department, I think that's been a challenge. So would like to hear about the next steps on that. Interested in the viability of increasing ZBA to weekly instead of biweekly, at least temporarily, to deal with this backlog, which seems like something that would be costly in some sense, but then also probably make up for itself in terms of permit fees and then just streamlining the process for everybody who's been waiting. That's bracketing the fact that we need to figure out how we're going to allow for robust public participation in the ZBA hearings, which I really would like them to talk through. And then I think this was asked by a colleague early on, but just the question of if, I think it was Councilor Edwards, if we're asking them to be part of, more health inspections, if COVID is raising a bunch of health and safety issues, I can imagine getting a bunch of calls about ventilation issues. I just wonder how ISD is positioning for the sort of, for a conservative reopening in the months ahead. So those are my questions for the departments. I'll go back up to the top. And Councilor Breeden has stepped out for a moment, so I'll go to Councilor Flynn and then Councilor Janey. Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor Block. And some of my points were already mentioned by many of our other colleagues, so I don't want to repeat them. But as it relates to DoIT, maybe I'd like to get some more information on some of the outreach that they are doing to our seniors. They're doing to our persons with disabilities as well, and to residents in the Boston Housing Authority, and whether the BHA residents have the right technology so that they can access computer technology in their developments, and if there are any areas that we need to upgrade technology so that BHA residents can benefit from the same technology, and this relates to the cable television as well, so that they can participate and receive the same technology as everyone else in the city. One thing I failed to mention as it relates to ISD, I want to learn more about some of our outreach that we need to do on rodent control. I think it's a critical issue in our city. And I want to know, with the construction that will soon take place, digging down into the ground, are we prepared for the ongoing rodent control that we have to do? I have receiving a lot of calls and emails from residents throughout my district on seeing if we can expand rodent control in various neighborhoods. And this is the perfect opportunity for us to advocate for more funding for it, because I think it's a critical issue. It's also a public health issue as well for residents. I also want to finally on the BPDA related issues. I'd like to get more information on, I highlighted it earlier, but on language access, but specifically, I'd like to learn more about the way we formally notify a civic group about how we're going to provide interpreters for an upcoming meeting, and whether that interpreter will be available, and if not available. As you know, I represent a large communities that don't speak English, so I'm always working on language access issues, but it's critical that everybody receive the same information on community meetings as well. And then just going back to inspectional services. I think it was Councilor Sabi George mentioned that they conduct a walking tour at times, but also inspectional services at one time, or still does, have a monthly discussion about their role in their outreach in their job. It's almost like a public awareness campaign for residents on exactly what the permit process is. I would like to learn more about that particular outreach they do, which I think is very good, but I'd love to get more information about it, and maybe see if we can promote it as well, so our residents know about it, even if they don't go to the specific meeting. But maybe there's an opportunity for ISD to put that on social media so others can benefit from that type of outreach. And those are my questions. Thank you, Councilor Bach, for giving me the opportunity for a second round. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilor Flynn. Councilor Janey.
Thank you. So I want to follow up. I think this is DoIT. I want to bring up the issue that I've brought up before around trauma response, because I think there is a technology piece that would help. And this is just looking at when, unfortunately, a violent incident happens in our community, like a shooting, how we respond in the schools. And while I know many of the schools have gone through different trainings to be trauma sensitive and have looked into those resources, I think there is something to ensuring that all children who are within a certain radius of the shooting that those schools are notified. So I'm not sure what the missing link in terms of the communication chain is. I think there's a technology piece here that I would suggest needs to be put in place so that when the number of children, and I can use, the number of children on a street like mine, and I don't know how many there are, but on any given street, there could be many children who are going to many different schools, not all the same school. And so when they show up to those different schools, are those schools then prepared to receive these children? And how do we communicate so that those schools know what happened or that something happened and that they should be prepared that those children may need extra support. So that's one issue. The other, just building on, I think, our desire on the council side to expand language access would have, I guess, some questions around what the different things, the possibilities for us on the council side as we look at expanding and engaging more folks in our work. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that is it for me.
Great. Thank you so much, Madam President. Councilor Breeden, are you back with us?
Hang on, I have to go. Sorry.
Okay. All right, Liz, gotcha. I appreciate you dropping in. I appreciate your message.
All right, thank you. Talk to you soon.
We appreciate it. We know you've been working hard on these issues for a long time. I confess I've been emailing trying to.
That person is in our, yeah. Just so you know,
yeah.
Councilor Breeden needs to go on a timeout.
You got to turn him off.
Turn her off, y'all.
Or at least mute yourself so that they're what they're saying is
on us. She's double dipping.
Being broadcast through all of us.
She's double dipping. Hang her up.
Councilor Breeden, you there?
Oh Lord. You say wants to work. Out of my list. I had a few more questions. Quickly, the BPDA project review for Article 80, I really would appreciate it that if they would require developers to complete like a cheat sheet for each project that would include basic data on like the FAR, green space, the number of units, the size of the units, the number of IDP units, and the range of the AMI. When you're trying to track projects in the neighborhood, and we have a lot of them, it's really difficult to get that basic information, and it doesn't seem like rocket science that each project would have a cheat sheet with that sort of information in it to help the public evaluate the project without having to dig through pages of reports. I also want to echo Councillor Sabi George's concern about we need to think about, and COVID has thrown a light on a whole lot of issues, but we need live workspace for not just artists, but for other folks who maybe are able to work at home, work remotely from home. But if you're living in a micro unit or a small studio, we're just not, in Austin Brighton, we're building so many micro units and small studios. We need to change the mix a little. I also have concerns about the diversity of the impact advisory groups that review all the projects. We need to diversify those groups, have a broader section of our community sitting on advisory groups, and to make sure that we're getting more voices to the table, not the usual suspects. We have a very narrow bench here, not a deep bench, a shallow bench. I'd also had some questions about linkage. I'd love a breakdown on the linkage funds that are generated by development in each neighborhood, especially I'm particularly concerned about Alston Brighton. What funds are generated? How and where are those funds dispersed? Where does that money go to? I'd like a breakdown of that. The last figures I had were between 1995 and 2015, we had 17.7 million square feet of linkage development in Alston Brighton. I have no clue where it was, how much money it generated, or where the money went. I'd love transparency in that area. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Great, fantastic. Okay, well, I don't see any further blue hands. If anybody wants to ask another question, raise your hand, speak now. Otherwise, seeing none, we're gonna adjourn this working
Wait.
session. Oh, no.
My blue hand is not up. For some reason, it's not working. Did you just disable my blue hand?
No, I did not. But Councilor Mejia, please go ahead.
Yes, no, I just wanted to, in the interest of just kind of always making sure that issues of small business minority vendors, I'm just curious across all platforms, what are we doing to ensure that we are engaging small businesses, minority and women owned in particular, in all contracting bids across all platforms? And I'm specifically curious about the BPDA in terms of kind of like when they are thinking about planning and design, what role are small businesses playing in that process to help them think through? So I'm just curious about that. Just want to.
Great. Great. Thanks so much, Councilor Mejia. Yeah, and I'll remind folks just that we do have a document from every department, including actually the BPDA. It's in the folder that Michelle sent out that has all their contracts over 100,000. So for that line of questioning, just go. That might be helpful to help to inform it in the hearing. Council President Janey, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, just to build on the last two speakers. Thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me to chime in. I think very important that we understand how much of the spend.
Madam President, we just lost you.
I'm so sorry. Can you hear me?
Now I can. Yeah.
I was talking that whole time.
No, you said it's important for us to understand, and then we lost you.
I'm not sure how it got muted. Okay, well, anyway, yeah, it's important for us to understand on all of these BPDA projects, how much of their spend is going to small local business, businesses owned by people of color, and businesses owned by women. To Councilor Breeden's point around some sort of cheat sheet, I'd advocate for this information to be on there. And my understanding is that this is where we're supposed to be in the city. I fought hard, and in my first 6 months, got through the Plan Dudley projects, the parcels that were going out to bid at that time, got them to include really important language around equity and inclusion in the RFP process. My understanding that from that pilot, and this language is based on the language from Massport, the equity and inclusion language. But my understanding for that became the norm for the rest of the city. I want to understand if in fact that is the case. If so, where are we in meeting that goal? So after, I don't know if that was clear. So where are we in equity and inclusion for all of the projects? My understanding is that's supposed to be a goal that we're trying to make sure that there's equity and inclusion on all of these projects, city projects. So from either D&D standpoint or from BPDA. And so I'd like to understand whether or not that is in fact just still some sort of goal or something we're moving toward in terms of requirement, and where we are on all the projects. And I would say that that should be front and center on any kind of cheat sheet if they develop one moving forward. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. Thank you so much, Madam President. Okay. All right. Now, final chance. Don't see any more blue hands or real hands. All right. So now I'm adjourning this working session of the Committee on Ways and Means, and we'll look forward to the hearing. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.